The following is a speech given by Geoff Stirling, President, Apache Communications International, to the Grand Bank Lions Club.
We now come to a most important part of tonight's program, and that is hearing from our guest speaker. I know when Lion Ern Taylor indicated that he was contemplating inviting Mr. Stirling to speak on this occasion, I don't think anyone truly realized that it would ever become a reality. But contrary to any negative thoughts, Mr. Stirling openly accepted Lion Ern's invitation, for which we are very fortunate. This is one part of the program I feel everybody has been looking forward to tonight. Mr. Stirling was born in St. John's. He received most of his basic education in St. John's, attended grammar school in England, and attended the University of Tampa, Florida. At the beginning of his career, he was responsible for founding the one-time known Sunday Herald, later known as the Newfoundland Herald Limited. He is the former president of the St. John's JCs and the first international senator selected some years ago from Newfoundland. He is former president of the Newfoundland Press Club, the Montreal Theatre Company, as well as president and chairman of the board of Montreal Radio Corporation, the Ontario Radio Corporation, and the Newfoundland Broadcasting Company. Presently, he is chairman of the board and controlling stockholder of Apache International, of which the holdings are for all of Mr. Stirling's radio and television holdings in North America. Currently, Mr. Stirling has his own TV series entitled Conversations with Geoff Stirling. The program itself indicates the open-mindedness this man maintains, the philosophical view that we, as Newfoundlanders, should not allow ourselves to accept the ordinary. Rather, we should raise our sights and look beyond the ordinarily accepted way of living and seek to better ourselves, has been proven to be true. For we need only to look at Mr. Stirling's accomplishments to substantiate this. The art, like that of a well-known book entitled Jonathan Seagull, of getting out there and trying, regardless of negative criticism or failure, giving everything we undertake our fullest, of continually experimenting with thoughts and feelings, of consciously becoming aware of ourselves, taking a whole look at our being, of raising the level of our consciousness to the extent that we develop our fullest unique potential which we individually possess. There's one trend in philosophical thought that I feel is part of Mr. Stirling's psyche. I feel that his program that he presently has on CJON can invaluably assist any individual in search of values or a change of attitude by giving that particular individual some positive direction. This is Mr. Stirling as I see him. For I feel we have here tonight a man who wants more out of life than merely existing, a man who has gotten more out of life than just mere existence, and a man who has developed a drive to achieve what he wants to achieve. I personally feel that his program concerning self-awareness is indicative of a man who has found harmony within himself. Without my saying much more, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to present to you tonight a man who is interested in golf, skiing and skin diving and proper diet, a man who has experienced more than most men in Newfoundland, but a man who feels that anyone in Newfoundland can accomplish just as much if he truly wants to. A very unique individual for a very special night, Mr. Geoff Stirling.
Incoming president, past president, executives of the Lions Club and Grand Bank. It's pretty inspiring to be with a group of people who represent over 1 million men throughout the world, who are dedicated to making God's world a little better, to developing and seeing only the best in their fellow man, and bringing out and developing the best in themselves, so that their life might be an inspiration. Grand Bank is one of the probably oldest cultural centers in Newfoundland. A great deal of history has flown here and passed through here. Many illustrious Newfoundlanders were developed here. Your present Justice Minister and many, many others who have come from this part of Newfoundland, which has seen many times such tragedy, and yet has always had that spirit and that determination to grow and expand, as Newfoundland settlements have throughout this incredibly large province that we're so inclined at times to see only as a small island. It's larger than the Maritimes combined. It's larger than Spain. And when you consider the immensity of Newfoundland Labrador, you realize something of the magnitude of our potentials. And there's only 520,000 of us. But we've always underestimated ourselves tremendously, for many reasons. And I'm proud tonight in the 23rd annual banquet in honor of the ladies to be invited down here, because without the ladies, none of us would be here. And it is the ladies who inspire us. It isn't much of a life if you try to do it alone. And yet, we don't always give them the credit they deserve. We don't always maybe appreciate the sensitivity and undercurrent of support they're always giving us. In fact, 2 days ago, was having a cup of tea with a good friend of mine who I've known for 30 years. And he was sitting there with his wife, and we were discussing the ills of the world. And he said it all started when they gave the women the vote. His wife didn't say anything. I thought, well, women's liberation will kill you, because it's rather an extreme statement, and I don't agree with you. Because the woman, at times maybe, is more emotionally inclined to go along with the opinions of her husband. But I think the women of Newfoundland certainly have, in the course of the next 10 or 20 years, to face up to the responsibility they have more than they have in the past. And that is, it's up to them, number one, because they have the children in their possession in those formative years, to instill in them a much higher sense of confidence, a much higher sense of who they are. We're awfully inclined, as Newfoundlanders, to be a little negative in many ways. Now, the Lions Club stands for some pretty wonderful things. The love of children, the love of life, the love of poetry, the love of service, the love of your fellow man, and the love of yourself, because unless you love yourself as your neighbor, you can't love anybody else. And love of self certainly has to start with respect of self. You have to respect yourself. And when you are beaten down occasionally, you start to lose your respect if you put up with too much. If you're exploited too outrageously, you start to lose your self-respect. And when you lose that, you lose your confidence. That's why I guess the perfect happy couple is a wife who always inspires, who never nags, never catches herself saying a negative word, never uses the occasion when a husband comes back tired and weary after a grueling day on the fisheries, or on the plant, or on the street, or in the office, and lays in her negativity, because he needs inspiration. The greatest thing a man needs when he comes home, certainly, is the inspiration of a loving woman. And it is up to the women to overcome the negativity that we all have to fight against, because we are constantly having negativity flow through us. Jonathan Seagull is an incredible novel. Those of you who have not yet had the beauty of the experience of reading it, or even more wonderfully hearing the LP by Richard Harris, have a treat beyond your imagination. The man who wrote it was a pilot, and this is a true story. he was sitting by his typewriter trying to write another story, as he was a writer as well as a poet. And in the course of trying to write it, he stared at the blank papers, and suddenly he heard a voice over his shoulder. The voice frightened him for a minute. And the voice started to dictate Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And he started to type it down. And then halfway through the book, which is a very tiny book of less than 80 pages, the voice stopped. And for 3 years, he couldn't finish the story. And then again, the voice started and ended. He tried taking the book to a publisher, but it was rejected. He didn't tell anybody that he had heard a voice, because he thought they'd think him insane. They would think that that kind of mysticism doesn't happen anymore. Who could be the voice? Unless you have a religious base to your life, you can't even comprehend, let alone entertain the fact that there could be a voice outside of yourself, not in his head. He heard the voice over his shoulder. I watched him one night tell this story to a room full of sophisticates in San Francisco. And a few giggled and thought, well, that's a great put on. And he stopped the meeting and said, it's true. I didn't write this book. It was dictated through me. And the story is a story of human consciousness in the form of a seagull. And the seagull is on the beach watching the other birds fighting for fish heads, clawing at each other as man does in the competitive world, fighting each other, showing little mercy, very little compassion unless he happens to be the same group. The competitive world, which has reached such a stage that we can't trust many things, many products, many companies, or many people, because we have clawed and scratched in our greed and avarice to such an extent that we have created such disillusionment in the world that we are facing now a tremendous breakdown in confidence. If you can't trust the president, who can you trust? A good question. You can't trust the attorney general in charge of justice in the land. Who can you trust? A good question. When you can't trust the highest elective office in the land, who can you trust? Well, Jonathan Seagull saw this. He saw the herd, and he decided to try to learn to fly, to not live a life fighting on the seashore. But the herd doesn't like the maverick. The herd doesn't like the individual who tries for excellence in his life, who understands that you're not here to fight for food and scramble, but you're here to live your lives as fully and as complete and open the potential you have, God given you, as widely as you can. And very, very few men even comprehend that life is more than just the comfort of getting by till they finally bury you, or you get that pain in your chest and it's all over. Well, that isn't what life's all about. But most men and women don't even consider the basic fundamental thing that the father of medicine said, let food be your medicine and medicine your food. We never even consider that we are what we eat. If you eat a lot of dense food, you'll become dense. During the Depression, it was very obvious when you would go to small settlements where men had bad diets, very little good food. You see the density. You see in the wealthy homes where they have lots of fresh vegetables and fresh fruit, the difference in the children. You go to the good English public schools, and you realize the care, they balance the diets so that those minds may be as alert as possible. Because surely as you sit there, you are what you eat. And if you eat lots of French fried potatoes, lots of food covered with grease, lots of long dead meat, lots of bad food filled with preservatives, then you will certainly end up with an organism which is not very effective. You won't have the confidence because you won't be feeling too well. You can't be confident if you don't feel well. You're worried about your body all the time. You're trying to get by. You're trying to keep it alive a little bit longer as you gorge yourself with all the wrong food because your mind doesn't even conceive that you are what you eat. So Jonathan Seagull stopped eating. That was the reality of the book. He then started to concentrate on flying. And he left the herd, and he started to learn to fly. And the movie is a disaster, because the man who made the movie didn't understand the book. In the book, Jonathan Seagull is flying at night, learning to fly by taking tremendous dives from 5,000 and 6,000 feet, which seagulls never do. And suddenly he said to himself, I can't fly in the night. A seagull never flies in the night. They stay on the ground at night. I haven't got a fork and short wings. And then he said, a fork and short wings? He suddenly had it. He turned into a dive and put his wings right against his body, and just used the tips of his wings to come out of the fantastically deep dive instead of the wide wings, which in the movie, because they used a miniature remote-controlled plane, they couldn't fold the wings. So the story lost its significance. And that is man's willingness to give up everything and take a chance. What is life if you're afraid to take a chance? I can't leave this job. I'm making $650 a month. I mightn't make it at the next job. I might fail, and I'm afraid of failing, so I won't try. Well, that's the basic problem we have in Newfoundland. We're terrified because of our years of beer survival, because we see the more articulate Canadian, and particularly the American, come in, who's come into Canada and basically developed Canada. 90% in many cases, the industry is owned by Americans, 80% of other industries, 55% of other industries. Most of the men I talk to in the capitals of the world are American citizens who are in charge of corporations because they had that confidence. The American confidence is developed because the American cities have proper facilities for their young people. They have realized that the quality of life is essential. That if you don't give your young people a quality of life, if you don't look after them and don't give them the confidence, you're going to end up with 48 windshields broken. You're going to end up with the kind of vandalism we're seeing around this country because nobody seems to have any conception that unless we give our young people the facilities they need to get the confidence to grow together, we're going to have a continuation of what we have, which is a very, very small managerial class in this country. So small that I can't find managers for radio stations. Because a manager isn't just a name. A manager is a man who has the overview, who realizes his costs, who realizes that he has to have total control of his consciousness to know exactly what things are costing, so he knows what his break-even point is so he can make a profit. Most men who take jobs only know that they get paid at a certain day, and they do their job. They leave and forget the job when they go home. Well, they're workers, and the less that a man thinks, the more he works for someone who does. And in direct proportion to the amount of thinking he does, or lack of it, he becomes more and more a beast of burden, until all he can do is go out in his fishing boat and bring in the fish. And if they're not buying it at 3 cents a pound, he throws it overboard. He doesn't say to a friend, let's get a truck and take it up to Gander, and we'll sell it at the restaurants. I saw them throwing away herring in Notre Dame Bay last week. And I got in the hotel in Gander, and I phoned down to the chef, and I said, do you have any fresh herring? And he said, no. I said, would you buy some if you had some? He said, of course. Well, I said, there's a lot of fishermen who like to put the things together, but they can't, because all they see themselves as fishermen. not middlemen, not merchandisers, not people who can develop jobs. All we think about in this country is, where will I get a job? It's pathetic, the young people who come up to me and say, Mr. Stirling, have you got a job for me? I said, did you ever think of creating a job yourself? The government doesn't seem to understand it, either at the provincial level or the federal level, that the only thing that makes the country is the initiative of men who will create work. Because the men who create the work and the men who create the corporations and the men who create the workers are the men who create the taxes that make a government possible. If you eliminate all personal initiative, you end up with no government, because what do they use for money? Well, you can have the socialist system or the communist system where there isn't any private enterprise, where the commissaires decide what will take place. Well, you can't change your job. You can't leave the country if that's what you want. I was there, and I was awful doggone glad to get out when I left Cuba. Sure, they've got schools. Sure, they've done a lot of things. But there's a terrifying feeling there, and you don't see many smiling people, because they haven't got the free enterprise system, where you can, if you have the courage and the determination and the confidence, go to the bank and borrow the money to start the business that's going to give a few people a job. Now, I know it's very difficult to get money out of a bank. One of the curses of this country is the reactionary aspect of most bank managers, because we need a national bank where we can go in and get money to create the businesses, which will in turn create the taxes, which will create a healthier country. And until we get a few thousand Newfoundlanders who have the guts and the courage to create their own businesses and thereby create more jobs, we're going to sit around and wait for the Sheens and the Doyles to come down with their energy and their fast talk to create the jobs for us. And all you'll do is be a guy at some refinery smelling of gasoline. I'm rather sick of the lack of initiative and energy I've seen in this country. I have people come up to me and say, I'm not getting very good reception down here, Mr. Stirling. I say, that's great. What do you think I am, Santa Claus? If you're not getting reception, it's because your town can't support a station. I don't get government grants. I don't get government loans. I don't get government advertising. Because 50 years ago, the government passed a law that you had to put your ads in the daily papers. There wasn't any television in those days, so that's where the ads all go. $300,000 or $400,000 a year in the 2 daily papers, which you seldom see in most of the country. But 95 of you get television, but you don't see any ads on it. If you did, we could expand even more. Although I wouldn't want to have too many government ads, because then you're in danger of being intimidated, like I was with the Herald. 6 weeks after I got on the streets, because I pointed out that the government had refused the Americans' offer to pay Newfoundlanders equal wages. Instead, they betrayed us and let us be paid $1.25 an hour. And so we never had a middle class, because millions and millions of dollars that should have been paid to Newfoundlanders were never paid them. And I printed it. And as a result of it, the Commission government passed an order in council forbidding any advertising in the Sunday Herald. And for the entire life of the Commission government, I didn't get a cent. Not a nickel. Well, the hell with it. I did it anyway. Because I did it on circulation alone. We told enough true things, and some editors told, well, rubbish, but through it all was the truth. And the truth will make you free. And the truth is, you've got to get off your rear end and start to look yourself in the mirror and say, do I just want to be a worker all my life? Is that all I'm good for? Can't I be a salesman and thereby work for myself, because that's what a salesman does? The minute you can be a salesman and sell, you're free. Like Jonathan Seagull. He suddenly broke through and he started to fly. He didn't have the 9 to 5 routine, which must be terrifying to have. As far as I'm concerned, I've only worked for one man in my life, and that was my father for 18 months. And I said, never again. I will work for nobody. I'll work for myself, or I'll go down to the beach in Central America somewhere and sell coconuts. Get your agencies, get your products, get all what you have to get. But you've got to have an understanding of business. And business means that you're not a manager who then hires somebody to sell for you, because if you can't sell yourself, you're dead. Because if you have to depend on the other man to sell for you, He should be the manager, not you. That's the problem we have in places. The manager sits in his office and sends out his salesman. Well, he's not a manager. He's just got the name for a very short time. Then he's back with the herd again. Because freedom is really getting free. And really getting free means that you have the ability, whether it's to stand up and someone has to write your speech for you, that's brilliant. What are you doing? You're a robot there with your mouth. That's why I won't let any more politicians come in front of our cameras with prepared speeches. Because the population and public think that they're hearing the politician. They're not hearing the politician. They're hearing some guy who wrote the speech. Well, that's a fake advertising, isn't it? If you're voting for the man because of the way he speaks, because of the creativity of his thought processes, you say he'd be a good man to represent Grand Bank or Fortune or Lawn, I'll vote for him. And you find that somebody else wrote every word he said. Well, what kind of fake advertising is that? Under false pretenses, as far as I'm concerned. We've got to clean up our political machines and make them honest again and get men who really care again, who don't go in there for what they can get, but for what they can serve and do. We need men who will have the imagination to put through and forward the kind of concepts that will create new work. It's fine to build a road across this country, and the Smallwood administration deserves every credit for it. But beside that road, there should be at least 50 units of hotels, theaters, recreation halls, playgrounds, meeting halls, motels, all the units that are necessary in the forks of the roads leading down from the Trans-Canada Highway, and that could give 2,000 or 3,000 jobs, because it would tie together the concepts we have here of a fantastic country, wide open for tourists who will come by the millions if we want them during the 3 or 4 months and we keep the country pollution free. And we would have the beginning of an area where we could, number one, expose our live talent, have people who work as bartenders and waitresses and office clerks and helpers, and build a whole new core of middle class. But we sit on our duffs and we wait for someone to give us a job. Well, who are you waiting for? The government. Who is the government? The government is mostly of unsuccessful men who made it in the government and then give each other the contracts. Last week in Quebec, Mr. Barrasso admitted that he had formed, through his wife and his father-in-law and his brother-in-law, a company that in the last 12 months had only gotten $1 million worth of government business. Beautiful. $500,000 profit. And they think they're businessmen. Well, that's a pretty big rip-off, isn't it? Well, it's happening everywhere. Not one single bit of the $290 million worth of contracts for the Olympic Games in Quebec in 1976 are out on tender. So you can sure there's going to be a 20% rip-off, which is $59 million, which isn't bad. Now, what's happened is the government are a bunch of men who get elected. And we have looked at this government and said, well, you know, the government is that great group of angels up there who seem to have all the moxie. Well, who are they really? They're a bunch of men who are lawyers, or businessmen, or doctors, who have got elected. Now, we could take any 22 men in this room and say, you're the government. Now, what have we accomplished? Have we got a leader? Have we got creative thinkers? Have we got new initiative? All we got is we change your names. Well, you don't make it that way. You don't make it by just calling yourself a manager, and you don't make it by just calling yourself a prime minister, and you don't make it by calling yourself a social justice minister or anything else. If there's injustice in the country, it's not that simple anymore, and television has changed it. You can't fool this new generation, the under 30s, the acid heads who have dropped acid and had profound experiences, and then we're told that acid is a terrifying thing, which it certainly is, if it's not controlled as it should be, but it gave them insight. It's very strange, isn't it, if you read any of the books on these drugs, that millions of people had the same experience, a religious experience. They tried it with 100 ministers at Harvard University, 100 Protestant ministers, and 50 of those ministers came back and said we had the most profound religious experience in our lives. I watched a film at the Baltimore Institute where people who were dying under 25 of cancer, dying in terror because they were so young and they only had less than 3 and 4 weeks, all of them, to live. Young girls, mostly. And they ingested LSD. And they filmed them during the 9 hours the drug affects them. And when it was over, not one of them feared death anymore because they had had such an insight into their minds. Now, what does all this mean? Well, it means that the mind hasn't even been tapped. It also means that these drugs should be very much under the control of government experimentation. But we have simply turned our back on them and not experimenting. The Russians are experimenting, but we're not. We have simply closed our minds to the possibility that the fact that we're only using 8 to 12% of our mind may mean that we can open another 5%. By proper diet, by experimentation, drug experimentation, maybe in front of television cameras. It'd be very interesting for Newfoundlanders who have heard so much of the abuse of marijuana. George Washington, the United States President, grew marijuana. In his autobiography, he talks about, this year we got a wonderful crop coming in because it was safer than tobacco. Now that's the hoax you've had about marijuana. 43,000 Canadians arrested last year, so we need a lot more police. A lot more police mean a lot more taxes. A lot more taxes, a lot more inflation. Brilliant. You wonder why things are going up in price. Did you ever think about what caused inflation? Now, here's a subject that no one wants to talk about, particularly the politicians. They all blame the other guy. And if you elect them this time, it'll come down for sure. It's funny how politicians start to tell you all the good things they're going to do 6 or 7 weeks before the elections. All new kinds of schemes. It's amazing. And then the opposition tells you all the things they're going to do. Now, none of them ever give each other and say, look, we're in power, let's do the best thing we can for the people. They really are a funny bunch. And we've got to reassess the entire political structure if we're going to ever come out of this present galloping inflation. Well, galloping inflation takes place when you print more money than your products. A $100 bill costs 5 cents to print. That's how much the paper's worth, and the ink, 5 cents. So for 5 cents, I can print $100. And I can give $100 to Alan, and he'll work a couple of days for me. So it's cost me 5–10 cents. Now that's what inflation is, because what happens with inflation is when you lose the integrity of your administration that is locked originally the printing of money into the gross product, interrelated. But when they get into a stage where they can't solve their problems, they start to quietly print more money. So the products start here going up at this rate and the money goes at this rate. And eventually it costs you 50 cents for a loaf of bread that previously cost you 5 cents. Because you can print a $100 bill for 5 cents and you can put another naught on the end and a comma in between. You got a $10,000 bill for 6 cents. Now that's what they call duplicating real wealth. Manufacturing wealth by printing machines, which of course they didn't have up to a few hundred years ago. That's why gold was always the basic commodity for every civilization back as far as any historian in this room or viewing me can ever remember. It had to be based on real gold. And the nations of the world in Greece and Rome, when they got the gold mines, the kings of England, the kings of Spain, when they sent their ships and brought back the gold, that was the base for their economy, because they had some real thing that was accepted in exchange for goods. An ounce of gold given to a farmer for his wheat gives the farmer something he can go anywhere in the world and trade. But a paper bill of $10,000 given to the farmer is only good in that particular country if there's any faith in that money. But you try cashing most of the paper of the world around this country. You take a Canadian dollar bill and get off the plane in Chicago, where the Lions Club was founded 56 years ago, and find out what they do with that $100 bill. The taxi driver won't let you out of the cab, I'll tell you. Because we're starting to understand, just as the Arabs are, that paper money is no better than the integrity of the government printing it. And a government that will tap the phones of every world leader unknown to him while he's in the office, including Pierre Trudeau's, was tapped when he was down in Washington. An attorney general who will sit in his office and plan how to break into the office of the opposition and get the CIA to listen in the telephone calls and get the lonely senator's girlfriend's name so they can blackmail the senators into voting properly. That's the kind of integrity that brought about Watergate. And that's the kind of integrity that this month printed another $30 billion worth of paper money. Now you wonder what's going to happen. Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. And it's going to happen in the next 24 months. You're going to have a massive collapse of the economy in the United States. And that's why gold, sooner or later, has to come back as the basic trading unit, much against the arguments of the men who, at this particular moment in the Nixon administration, control the financial distribution of wealth. There's a great deal of dishonesty taking place right now, particularly among bank managers. I had a friend in Cuba who happened to be the director of the movie Waiting for Fidel, which is the movie we did with Joey when we went down to see Castro. It's going to be released in November. And he said to me, I went to buy gold, but the bank manager said I was unpatriotic. I was not showing enough faith in paper money, so I didn't buy it. I said, well, you just lost $6,000 because it just doubled today. Now, you better go back to that bank manager and beat the living hell out of him. Or get your $6 grand, because he's a dishonest man. And a lot of bank managers are going to face this fact. They told a lot of men and a lot of people not to buy gold. Well, if you don't buy gold, and you're sitting under your mattress, and a lot of Newfoundlanders who work in the bases and that have a lot of American money hidden away. They're little nest eggs all over this island, and a few of my friends included, and I'm saying it right now, that if you've got American money hidden in your house, and if you've got American money hidden anywhere, you better turn it in for Canadian money or buy gold, because one of these days you're going to wake up and find it's 1923 all over again in Germany, when the mark went from 1 in 4 to 176,000 in 4. Because they're going to have to devaluate sooner or later, at least 5 to 1, maybe 3 to 1. So if you got $1,000, you're going to end up with $333. Now that's going to happen. Nobody's telling you this. Nobody in our government that I know of knows what he's talking about as far as financial reforms are concerned. I have yet to meet a bank manager who knew what he was talking about. He came up as that's a pretty heavy statement, isn't it? I'll never get elected. But how do they come up? Well, they come up, they go in as a young man, and they get a job as a teller, and they work religiously 10 hours or 5 hours a day, and they reach 33 or 34, and they get made an assistant bank manager, because they know how to handle basic mathematical things. And finally they get made a manager, and they're sent to some small town, and they sit around and look at your hard, glint eyes when you ask for a loan. And if you got all the credit and you mortgage your house and your wife and your car and your children, you might get it. Well, I tell you, we've got to look at all these things very carefully. Because these men are not selling gold nuggets or gold wafers in the banks of Newfoundland. Don't forget, we're the only citizens in the world at this particular moment in world history who can buy gold right now. Not an American citizen cannot buy gold right now. According to the Senate that just passed a bill allowing Americans to buy gold, on the 1st of September 1974, Americans can buy gold unless Nixon vetoes it. Well, Nixon's in such deep trouble that he won't dare to veto it, I don't think. But if he does, eventually Nixon will be out. And it's going to happen sooner or later. And when that day comes, the world's supply of gold is only 45 million ounces a year. Now, 45 million ounces means that 10 million Americans out of 220 million buy 5 ounces each. That's the world supply gone for a year. Now, what do you think is going to happen to the price of gold? It's already tripled in the last 36 months. The Sunday Herald, the Newfoundland Herald, was the only paper in the world, to my knowledge, that told everybody to buy gold. I was sitting on a plane with a guy the other day, and he said, "Thanks, Geoff, I just made $40,000. I don't know whether he's putting me on or not, but anybody who'd listened to our advice would have, because we listened to our own advice, and we did well. Now, it all comes back to confidence. It's not enough to be confident, as we all know. You can't con them in Newfoundland. It's very hard to cod somebody, because we're on an island, and you're going to see you in 25 years. For the rest of your life. So you can't fool them anymore. The American, to a certain extent, has been guilty of a little exaggeration because he can move around from town to town. You never catch up with him. It's like a salesman who just can't make it or gets a job, and when they finally find out he doesn't have what it takes, he quits and goes somewhere else and keeps moving. Well, you can do that in a big country, but you can't do it in Newfoundland. Sooner or later they catch up with you. And the word gets around that you haven't got what it takes. You haven't got the confidence. Now, the minute you give up on something, you lose the confidence. We all know as young people, young girls and young men, this room is filled with people like George Foote, who had the confidence when this Lions Club was formed, with Mr. Nixon, that he just took over the first year, the second year, and then the third year he was president. Well, he had the confidence to do it. He had the confidence to build it. He had the confidence to stay with it. Well, that's what it takes. Alan, I'm sure, has the confidence. He looks to me like 22. He blew my mind. He's 34. Well, he's got the confidence. Your outgoing president, Ron, has the confidence. The men in the Lions Club I meet all over Newfoundland who just put in an open next Wednesday, Olympic-sized pool in Carbonear, had the confidence. You know, the attempt of the company in Buckens to beat down the confidence of the Newfoundlander during that terrifying strike. Did you help them out with your fund? Can you imagine a company so miserable that they didn't even look after the swimming pool for the children while they tried to screw the living daylights out of the workers? A big company, a multi-million-dollar company that has 37 other companies, and they're paying them much higher wages. They're repeating the same thing in the commission government, and we're standing by and allowing it. I had breakfast out in the mess hall at the Buckens last Friday, because I'm traveling around this country after having been away a long time, and I'm really getting to know it again. And I sat there in the mess hall, and I said, "Can you eat all you want?" Yes, they said, $69.75 a month. Well, I said, "That's great, but this hall has all the savoir-faire of an operating room in North China." Where is the posters? Where is the sense of the dignity that we're eating here? Where is, at least have a mural showing the progress of the company? I went around Buckens, and I know the people of Buckens won't take offense at this, but if I put a 10-foot wire fence around Buckens, I could have been in West Germany, or East Germany, during World War II. The houses are peeling off. It's outrageous, and that company has taken $100 million out of Newfoundland, and their gold profits alone are 3 times what they were a year and a half ago. Well, do you think they'd have $500,000 to look after and provide accommodations and decent quarters and decent dining rooms and decent respect for the Newfoundlander's dignity, that he would live and eat in a decent place while he served that company, and his children would have somewhere to go, and playgrounds, football fields, soccer fields, baseball fields? I'll tell you what, if that company was operating in the United States of America, it wouldn't be getting away with this. Not for one damn second. And it shouldn't be here. Buckens is so out of the way that I doubt if many of our politicians have ever seen the town. Well, they need a lot of travel to get acquainted on why they're being paid. Because Buckens needs. They fought for 7 months to get $3.89 or $3.98 an hour. An old man said to me, I went to work for the A&D company in 1908. I said, "How much do you make?" He said, 5 cents an hour. He said, "When I worked half an hour, they never gave me the other half a cent." I said, "What a beautiful company that must have been." They only get 50% of the mining concession from Buckens as profit. It's the same all over the country. And the Bullwaters, for God's sake, are selling lots back to Newfoundlanders who don't even work for the company for $4,000 an acre. How much do you think they're ripping us off for? It's outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. And our politicians are around spending $160 million buying back Churchill Falls. Well, why in the hell don't they use the $160 million to create jobs or do something of value? It's all right I don't take offense to them buying it back, and in basic theory it's all right, but we don't have the kind of money to tie up 160 million when the same 160 million could create 5,000 or 6,000 new jobs if they were creative and thought. If Frank Moores wants to come on television and debate this with me, I'll be happy to have him on, or any member of his government. That's the way we're going to get this out in front. If Joe wants to come on, or whoever else is there, come on and let's talk about it. Let's show how much consciousness you got. Because your consciousness comes out when you talk. When you say, here's how we can solve this. Joe Smallwood said to me on television one night, there's no answer for that. I said, Joe, that's nonsense. You got computers. Run it through a computer. You can project the world's supply of food. You can do anything. How do you think we got on the moon? For God's sake, you guys are operating as if it's back in the 16th century. All due respects to you. But any man who takes 4 or 5 ounces of alcohol a day and pours it down the top of his head, well, in a month you got 90 ounces of alcohol gone through your system. You think you're going to be very sharp, very bright? No, you're not. Maybe you don't want to give up your drinks, that's your problem. But you'll never be a damn good manager for very long, because by the time you get into your 40s and 50s, you'll be mumbling. And no one will tell you, because nobody tells you you're gone over the hill, man. They just look a little sorry and try to avoid you. Watch your cocktail party in the United States. When I went to one with CBS the other day, 3 o'clock in the morning, I caught 3 smart eyes looking at me. Because one guy only had one eye. And one guy was the president of the company. And the other guy was the guy who's going to be president. Because they didn't drink. They took ginger ale all night, while their executives made fools of themselves. Nothing like a big cocktail party to weed out the idiots. Get 20 or 30 young models in, Tell the bartenders to give everybody doubles. And by 11 o'clock at night, you can weed out all those guys you want to work for you. Because anybody that's stupid, that drinks beyond his capacity, has no place in the managerial ranks. He's a worker. That's where it is. He's a worker. You got to work for somebody who thinks. And you don't put alcohol in your system unless you're out of your mind, for very much of it. You can take a little. I don't want to blow your bar here. But there's a limit. A couple of drinks. That's the most you can really take. Unless you want to run, you've got to see your body as an organism. And if you see yourself with even 3 ounces a week as 21 ounces a week, which is almost a bottle. Now that bottle is of alcohol, and you have pure alcohol, it'll kill you. The funny things that happen as a man reaches out to reach his potential. And I haven't said or done or can do anything that any other man can do. I've got my confidence, that's all. And how have I got my confidence? Well, I got my confidence by starting early, by desiring to be, whatever I did, do it well. And that meant self-discipline. I hopped around all one summer on one leg because I knew I wasn't tall enough really to be a champion high jumper, because I was jumping against guys in the States who were 7 feet high. Mostly black men, who were tremendous springs, and I knew I couldn't beat them unless I beat myself out while they were down having a beer. I was hopping around the garden in manuals. Well, at the end of the summer, I beat them. And that's how you do it. And if you want to, no matter who you are, or where you're coming from, or where you're going to, if you want to be a successful man, successful not necessarily outside of Grand Bank, I think it's something great to be successful inside. Inside, within the confines of your own environment. It's not so great to be in a penthouse. I said to a guy in a penthouse apartment in New York City, where he has his office, and he makes $175,000 a year. I said, this is great. I said, I'd like to take the carpets off the floors, the pictures off the walls, all those Chesterfields out of here, and put bars on the windows, and you scream and demand to get out of here. You don't even know you're in prison. They fooled you with the carpet on the floor. And you're going to stay here till you're 65 or 70 and have a little pain in your chest one day, and I'll be looking down and saying, well, that's interesting. He wasted 25 years in a little prison. He didn't even know he's in. He could have been in Newfoundland, being one of my managers. Well, I haven't got anything else to say. I can talk for a long time, as I'm sure you must be getting to the point right now. Indefinitely, in fact, on certain stories and certain feelings I have. Because I love to be with Newfoundlanders and share my feelings and my thoughts. And I need so desperately to find other men who want to come with me in the army we're going to try to form and put communications everywhere. Every small town in this country of 5,000 or 3,000, I've done it in Arizona with 2,700 people, and we got a very successful station. Well, that means I can build at least 20 more stations in this country. Now, maybe they won't have many big jobs. There'll be a manager and his wife and maybe another guy part-time. But that's 3 people. That's not bad, and you got a freedom, and you're communicating to your friends, and the Lions Club can be covered. Well, that's 60 or 70 jobs more, and they'll grow to 100, and your dependents will make it a couple of 100 or 300. Well, that's not bad. But I can't find those men. I get a few men now, and before I know it, they got 9 men working for them. Because they're not that versatile. They haven't got that kind of confidence yet. But we'll send them down and we'll train them. And we'll give them the confidence. But as it says here in the Lions Club motto, which is so beautiful, that you've got to leave this world a little better. You've got to see in your fellow man, regardless of his color or race, the beauty that is there, the spirit that's there, that God gave all of us. To reach out and fly like Jonathan Seagull and soar beyond our wildest dreams with the inspiration of the women who make life worthwhile. Without the women, really, it's really a dull life unless we have the inspiration of a loving face and shining eyes that think we're the greatest guy in the world, as they do when they fall in love with you. And that's what we all have here tonight, and that's what we all need so desperately. So let's all fly together. Thank you very much.
You have been listening to a speech given by G.W. Stirling, President, Apache Communications International, to the Grand Bank Lions Club.